Hello, everyone. This is Gary Gomes. I'm talking to you from New Bedford, Massachusetts. I'm going to be talking about Vedic astrology today and what it means over the next year or so. This is a broadcast that came up as a result of a question that a student asked me about the Saturn Rahu conjunction, which happens roughly every 30 years in one particular sign. So it happens more often than that. So the last time we had a Saturn Rahu conjunction was in 2016 or 2015, excuse me, 2015, 2014, when it happened in Libra. This next one, so I'll give you more information. I'm just going to backpedal and talk about what the show is about, how you can contact me for readings and lessons, and also how you can contact me for other things. So if you're interested in participating in the Saptarishi Gurukulam astrology session, which happens July 1st through roughly July 21st this year, just give me a call or to send me a text. If you'd like to appear on my show, give me a call or send me a text. And also, let me see if I can center myself a little bit better. And also, if you would like to schedule a reading, send me a call or give me a text. This is my contact information. My contact information is 508-525-0001. I'm fairly easy to get a hold of. And if you don't, so again, that's 508-525-0001. And I have also I will have some broadcasts coming up fairly soon in which I'm talking with other astrologers about various topics, about books, and also about astrology in general. Looking forward to some really interesting interviews in August. And I am still working on my book as time permits, and I am still working on a variety of side projects as time permits. So, but it looks like we're getting a little bit more busy. And today, if I seem a little bit, so I got to bed really late last night for a variety of reasons, and my energy level isn't that great today. But we're going to go into this and with eyes clenched and teeth blazing, as they say. So basically, Vedic astrology is Indian astrology, and any kind of astrology calls for recurring patterns. A lot of Western astrology looks for changes based upon positions of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, because those planets tend to move slowly and they interact with signs relatively infrequently. So when they return to certain positions in the sky, and some Vedic astrologers do this as well, they'll look at these for like big earth-changing events. But big earth-changing events happen more frequently than we realize. They happen really, I would say about every 15 years or so. These aren't like these aren't really all that unusual, to be honest. I'm not talking about things like changes in dynasties or changes in countries' directions, or but shocks to the economy can come relatively quickly. You can also have a variety of catastrophes happen relatively quickly. You can have major discoveries happen relatively quickly. That's been particularly true throughout human history, actually. Major discoveries aren't that frequent, but they are. They happen more frequently in an age in which communications improved, and that's where we live in. That's where we live now. So, without further ado, let's get back to the main topic at hand. First of all, I'm going to go to a screen note where I can show you. So we're going to look at the astrological events right now. We're going to look at the astrology around October 2nd, and we're going to look at astrology with the next Saturn Rahu conjunction, which is actually relatively close. So we're actually starting to feel the effects of that now. That's more like a slow buildup, more like a drum roll to an actual event, because there is this rather, I'm trying to think of how to put it. There's this series of events which seem inevitable when they happen, and then all of a sudden, when you look back in retrospect, you say, "Oh yeah, we should have been able to see that coming like years ago." And I think one of the things that happens is the Saturn Rahu conjunctions, because Saturn causes a certain amount of restriction in the sky. Saturn's nature as a planet is restrictive. It makes people feel like they're not getting a lot. It makes people feel like they want something different. It makes people want to, especially as Saturn enters Aries, it makes people feel like they want less restriction and more freedom and less inhibitions on behavior. And it also encourages technological breakthroughs, but Rahu comes down to frustrate that a little bit. So it'll cause reversals in what I would call changes that people want to see occur. And those changes, you'll see sort of like hit fever pitch and blow and really get very, very hot. And I'm going to focus on the two most recent Saturn Rahu eclipses, and that's back in the Saturn Rahu eclipses in Pisces, which were in 1991 and also in 1969. So, but before I do that, let me look at the map. So let me just look at the map of where the planets are now. Now, let me just jump to that, because I'm going to start with that today. And then I'll look at and then I'll bring it back to what seems to be leading up to that. Okay, let me reverse my order today. And so I'll go further out and then do like a reverse telescope effect and say where we are now. Okay, so let's go on to, and we'll still do the individual charts. These presentations won't last long. So let me share the screen. It's probably the first thing to do. You can see that that's the next Saturn Rahu conjunction. And you can see essentially this is the start of it. It'll last for a couple of months. These things, as they've existed in the past, don't really last a long time. Saturn just sneaks over into Pisces right before the conjunction occurs. And let's look at April 30th. I'm going to go 1 month ahead. So this is when, so somewhere in April, around mid-April, Saturn and Rahu will conjoin. So let's look at this particular combination. What I think this particular combination means. If we go by the 1991, that was the most significant event that happened in 1991 was actually the Gulf War. So a lot of people think it happened earlier, but it didn't. The Gulf War started in 1991, and essentially the war was over. You blink and it was over. And I think one of the things that this represents is sort of like a blow up or a sudden conclusion to a large series of events. In 1969, we had Nixon becoming president. We had the moon landing. We had the expansion of the Vietnam War. And what I would call the Nixon escalation, which peaked in 1971 with the bombing of Cambodia, the carpet bombing of Cambodia, to try, and the expansion of the war, which led to events like the Pol Pot dictatorship. And so essentially, what we're doing is we're facing what I would call, and there are other things happening in 1969. There were a lot of student demonstrations when Nixon assumed the presidency. The student demonstrations were ongoing. There were still riots in the cities ongoing, and these were essentially Nixon as president actually imposed a few changes. Number one, it was a clamping down against student protests. There was also the ramping up of programs of summer jobs programs to try to take the pressure off the cities around 1969. And also, like I said, we had that major technological breakthrough with the first landing of human beings that we know of on the moon. And the other thing that closed down, so a lot of people are getting really excited about UFOs and the trend towards UFOs being discussed right now in Congress. It happened a few months ago. That was also when Project Blue Book was shut down. So the largest official UFO investigation in history was actually shut down in 1969. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of those investigations, a lot of those probes shut down in 1969. Not because I believe or don't believe that aliens are visiting the planet. That's neither here nor there. I just think that a lot of the evidence will be a little bit still subject to question, still not ready for public consumption. And I know a lot of people are holding their breaths and hoping the aliens come over or expecting aliens to come over the next couple of years. I think that's the most unlikely thing to happen. I hate to disappoint you, but and I also think there'll be a clampdown on official investigations of it. The other thing that happened um, in previous in 1991 and in 1969 was 1969 was actually the start of um, the shortages of oil, and in some ways the start of the popular movement towards an ecological movement. So efforts had started in that particular area earlier on, obviously, but we have here and in 1968. So let's go back to 1969. Here's around. We're going to come back here. I want to say around June of 1969, June 10th. So I realize I'm hopping around a lot, but all right, so that's a little bit too far into the future. It's, you know, that's a little too far, not far enough. March 1st, 1969. All right, so this Saturn Rahu conjunction again, it lasted longer than the current one will last. The current one will be gone within a couple of months. This one started around let's go back a few months. Would have started in 1968. So let's go to December 1968. I'm go back all the way 1 year earlier. All right, so this one was operational. I go back to this one was operational as far back as late 1967, and I think one of the things is this was a prolonged Saturn Rahu conjunction. So we had a series of domestic strife in the United States, which lasted a long period of time. And one of the reasons that is happening in the United States is basically we have this is the fourth house, which is the home area of the United States. The one in 2025 will produce much quicker changes, much more rapid changes, maybe short scale violence, maybe trigger happy. It'll also happen when Jupiter is aspected by Saturn and also when Mars is debilitated. So we go back to April of 2000. So Mars had a chance to conjoin with that particular combination. So let's go back to April 15th, 2025. And we have Saturn, Venus, Mercury debilitated. Mercury's debilitated, and Mars is weak. And Moon is weak, actually. when the conjunction is almost exact. So we have some heavily compromised planets. So we're not going to see a lot of changes and not a lot of time to react. I hesitate to predict an all-out war. I would predict something more like a short-term conflict. Maybe we'll see an invasion of Taiwan around that time. Maybe we'll see local wars breaking out in Afghanistan. It certainly seems like we've been heading towards making the world a more unstable place over the past year or so. And that's mainly because of that Saturn and Rahu approaching each other. And Jupiter's ability to offset it is compromised. And with Mars over here, tempers will be short. Mercury over here, judgment will be rapid and stupid. So what we're likely to see is less prudence. So there is a possibility of a conflict, a very short conflict. I'm not talking about a nuclear war, but a short conflict happening in several places all around the world. Now, the way that these things have mapped out since the 1990s is they've been limited conflicts isolated to specific regions. And so, but the 1990s really weren't all that peaceful a decade. You had, in 1991, you had the, I think it was the Rwandan genocide, and also, it's the fastest genocide in history, if I recall correctly. And you also had the Gulf War, which had more of our attention. And you also had an increasingly unstable situation happening in Afghanistan and in what other country was it? Oh God, Afghanistan. And there was one other country I wanted to mention. Gosh darn it. Colombia, and also the resolution or the near resolution of Nicaragua, and we're still dealing with the fallout from what happened in El Salvador and the Nicaragua and the Iran Contras. So all these things lead up to what I would call a kind of a mess next March. If we go back to October 2nd, so this essentially means judgment is warped, financial security is a bit warped. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a crash, but also a certain mania developing when these Rahu-Saturn conjunctions develop. There's a certain irrational optimism, to quote a certain Fed chair who I don't want to quote because I think he was just a horrible Fed chair. But basically, you have this market high, and again, this will be brought by technological innovations, maybe like really, really strong new discoveries. Increased governmental control around April 15th, because that's the sun. That's when the sun is strongest, is around April 15th to May 15th. And even some suppression of economic prosperity. So maybe, I mean, we are in, the unemployment figures are based around payroll numbers right now. They're not based around people who are looking for work and can't find work or can't find full-time work. They're based around increasing payrolls. So that's not really it's really in an inaccurate way of judging unemployment because it doesn't take into account the number of people who are seeking work, of job seekers and job holders. So I think that basically you have this Saturn-Jupiter combination. This would be the right time for, I would say, a concentration of frustration across the world with domestic policies, which have been fruitless, which have been actually tearing away at the security and stability and the available resources of the countries of the world. And so you're either going to see a flip, a positive flip, in which people say, hey, we're not going to do war anymore, or a negative flip, and people say, the heck with it, I'm not going to stand for this anymore. And a lot of military people will just go like, yeah, what do we got to lose? You know, you have a Mars Moon exchange here. Our judgment isn't good. Let's go for it. So hopefully the latter won't happen. Hopefully there won't be the start of. There was a mild recession in 1969, but the 60s were overall. The 60s were not, in some ways, they weren't similar to this era, but they aren't dissimilar in that a lot of the social activities we're seeing, a lot of social initiatives we're seeing were not necessarily born, but reached fruition in the 60s and 70s. And again, a lot of the same social initiatives we're seeing, you know, essentially increased attention to civil rights, increased attention to the rights of groups who have been hurt earlier in society, like gays, blacks. Those things are at the fore of the society. Economically, though, it's a little bit of a different scenario because there was at least there was an ability to have money, and the inflationary pressure wasn't strong. The inflationary pressure, any inflationary pressure that will disappear this year will come back with a vengeance next year. I can almost guarantee that. And I think one of the things that we're looking at is Rahu's changing signs. So this conjunction won't last very long, but essentially sort of lasts for about 2 to 3 months, you know, roughly speaking. And or the exact conjunction as we go over here. Let's go to September of 2025. So Rahu will be totally out of the sign by September. Yeah, let's go to November. So Saturn is backing into Rahu, but they're never, I don't believe, going to ever meet again, because let me just go over here to 26. Maybe in 26 they'll meet again. Nope, doesn't look like it. So that particular period. Now, one of the interesting things about Rahu being in Aquarius is it does actually bring forward a lot of technological innovation. So that's one of the good things about it. But I think that this particular Saturn and Pisces conjunction is kind of it's good for the economy overall in general. So you may see an improvement in the economy after an initial shock, but I think overall it's the shock is going to be pretty strong. And the tendency towards more internet collapses or more shifts in economies, so power shifts in economies occurring is more likely at that particular time. Now, the United States has lived through these periods before without much damage. In the 1960s, the United States was in a K2 Mahadasha. So it was really embroiled in a war, what I would call a senseless war. And in the United States, but now the United States is in a Rahu Mahadasha when this is occurring. So that's not quite as favorable for innovation. It's not quite as favorable for the economy because don't forget, Rahu acts like a second Saturn. So I think one of the things you'll see is increasing technological innovation, increasing social unrest, especially in 2025. And I wouldn't say civil war, but a lot of civil unrest next year, and sort of peaking around March. So let's go to October 2nd. I just want to look at the eclipse. And you'll get kind of it. And one of the reasons I'm going to October 2nd is because Rahu and Ketu are eclipse planets. They cause eclipses. 2024. And I'm just going to go to this particular chart. I'm not going to go for the exact eclipse. All right. So this eclipse is Sun Ketu in Virgo. Is the United States 10th house. I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see troops on the ground from the United States around October 2nd. And I think one of the reasons I've seen that is because of this particular Sun Ketu combination. Also, just want to bring your attention to so this is Sagittarius, is the United States rising sign. Rahu is his 4th house. Mars is his 7th house. It's in his 7th house. And we have Sun, Mercury, Ketu, Moon in the 10th house, and Venus in the 11th. So he's going to want some gains. But I think this will be extremely humiliating for the government. Extraordinarily humiliating for the government. It wouldn't take a lot to change the current government of the United States, so to replace the current president. But that's one of the reasons I'm sort of won't be surprised to see a lot of United States friends turn on it around that time, mainly because of the domestic pressure they'll be feeling themselves. And if I want to go back to, so we saw the European elections. I've spoken about the European elections a lot lately. And we're also seeing increasing right-wing tendencies in Europe. And a lot of people are being fed that these are fascist governments, which I don't believe is true. They're conservative. They're more border protecting. They're not looking to wipe out peoples. That's not their idea. They want to hold on to what they have, and sometimes it's difficult to do that when when your population is being England. The current prime minister said that England's immigration rate is 3 times what it was last year. So, and that means incoming immigrants. Okay, so that's significant for a country of that particular size. So I think they're talking about 1.5 million people. That doesn't seem like a lot compared to what we're seeing in the United States over the past couple of years, but it is a lot of people when you consider England's population. So let's go right now. Let's go back to what's happening currently. Okay. So right now, and I don't know if you heard, but the draft or selective service has been reinstated by Congress for everybody: men, women, citizens, non-citizens. So you don't sign up anymore. You don't voluntarily sign up. You're automatically registered if they have a record on you. Okay, so that's, you know, I'm not going to be directly affected because I don't believe they're drafting 71-year-olds, but essentially, it does seem like they're preparing for some kind of a conflict. If you look at that, now that doesn't mean that conflict will actually come to bear, but it does certainly appear that way. So this could be a bluff move to scare the Russians off, because the Russians are putting warships off the coast of the U.S. and China has been ramping up some military activity, and Iran's ramping up military activity, and Russia has been visiting places like North Korea and Vietnam and other countries, and trying to tighten its relationship with China. So these are kind of dangerous times we're in right now. It doesn't necessarily mean anything is going to happen. And we do have Rahu surrounded by Saturn and Mars, which is kind of a malefic combination. So that could be causing a lot of early panic for no good reason. Okay. But mark my words, by next March, you'll see some major event, maybe even between October and March, because the eclipse happening where it's happening. So this doesn't bode well for economic security. It's not really the end of the world. That's really what I want to stress here. It's not really what I would consider to be an apocalyptic event or something in which economies are going to crash around the world. Also, petrodollars aren't being used anymore. They've found some kind of substitute currency. So the United States, as a dollar provider, will tend to impact the United States economy in pretty interesting ways. Now, again, there's no need to panic about this. A lot of these particular activities may have relatively inconsequential results in how you run your day-to-day lives. Okay. The other thing is, right now we have a Sun-Mercury Venus conjunction. Venus is still combust, but not horribly so like it was before. Mercury is pretty much, unless you take the most conservative takes, Mercury is pretty much out of combustion range. I would take it. Mars is in Aries, so it's still pretty potent. So people are still pretty fired up. And you have a lot of activity in the sign Gemini. Okay. So this is all connected with communication. So we're seeing an increasing propaganda war going on between the powers that be in Europe and the United States versus what I would call populists in uh, in these countries and around the world. And depending on your perspective, you may be worried about that, or you may be okay with that. It does. Populism is a funny thing because it assumed a bad reputation because it was a semi-populist movement that arose in Germany uh, in World War II. But this doesn't seem to be the same kind of issue. Uh, you have populist um, movements in the United States. Father Coughlin was a populist movement in the United States in the 1930s. You had the Mosley group in England in the 1930s, which lost a lot of support once it came out in favor of once it endorsed Hitler. And I think one of the things you have to be careful about is that populist movements aren't the only unification in ideology is that they're largely interested in protecting nations. That's really the only unifying ideological strain. Some of them do have less desirable or downright bigoted and hostile views towards certain populations. There's no doubt about that. But I think one of the things that we've seen with over the past 30 years or so is the globalist societal structures have been essentially stripping away national identity and trying to make sort of what I would call a uniform society. And the uniform society doesn't necessarily go to help the people of the country. It goes to help the people in power in the country. So that's one of the reasons why populism, as long as it doesn't get out of control, is a healthy reaction to globalism as opposed to an unhealthy reaction. That's just my bias. Again, you don't want to, you never want to see it get to the point where it's, let's jail all these people or let's have a revolution. That's not what you want to see happen in a populist movement. So essentially, if it can be allowed to express itself and, let's say, roll back some of the globalist tendencies that have dominated the world over the past 30 years or so, that's healthy. If it goes too far, then it becomes unhealthy, like anything, right? Okay, so that's just my perspective. Everything I say on this channel is my opinion. Okay. So, but it does look inevitable from the map. Essentially populism is going to grow over the next year or so. And attempts to suppress it or deny it will only make it stronger. So I think if we're looking at the world map right now, this Sun, Mercury, Venus conjunction does indicate governments trying to control media. We're seeing that internationally. This is true not only in the United States, but also in Europe, also in, so Scotland passed its hate crimes law. And also Australia, which I mentioned a few weeks ago. But this Jupiter is over here is a relatively strong Jupiter. It's in an enemy sign, but it's a relatively strong Jupiter. Now, when Mars meets up with this Jupiter in about a month or so, it might get a little bit more violent than normal. It'll be an expansion of violence. So this is a period I would look for the next month and over the next, I would say, into July through August and up through the eclipse for increasing violence. Okay, and I've said this before. So economic downturn, yeah, definitely a potential around October 2nd, and even a little bit earlier. And we have a retrograde Mercury happening in, or it will feel the effects in mid-July, and they'll last into September. So it'll be kind of interesting. The summer months will be kind of interesting. The other thing is, if we look at this map, so we're going to look at the world map in a few minutes, but I do want to get to the individual horoscopes. So I spent a lot of time on that. My apologies for that. But we have Aries. So let's go to the individual horoscopes. Aries has, so just be careful over the next couple of months. People will be a little bit more aggressive than normal, a little bit more testy than normal. So Aries is 1, 2, 3, 4. Good for financial growth, good for leadership, good for commands. A little bit difficulty place for illnesses, and good for change. But again, not as much growth with Saturn in the 11th house financially. Taurus, this is May 15th to June 15th. We have good potential for money, but also high expenditure level because of spouse. We have Moon in as Lord of the third house, placed in the 8th house. So that can mean increased desire for privacy. K2s in the 5th house, children will be a bit unruly, for a lot of work for this sign this month. A lot of spending, but a lot of work and a lot of recognition. For Gemini, Mercury's in its own sign. It likes it there. Venus is in its own sign. It likes it there. These individuals will look very attractive, very presentable. Change in relationship partners is indicated for these people, and the elimination of one, letting out of one relationship partner, entering of another, maybe a change, an emotional change. Good for money, good for financial growth, and also K2's in the 4th and Rahu's in the 10th, so some frustration in career. Slowest with monetary growth, but it will be there. And finally, Jupiter's in the 12th house, has to watch out for spending patterns. For Cancer, Cancer has the horror lagna in the sign. It's good for wealth. So it will give some increased financial recognition to the sign. So the sun is in the 12th house, so a lot of expenditures over Cancer. K2's in the 3rd, so a lot of ambition for the sign. Moon is in the 6th. It has to watch out for its health, major minor health issues, especially connected with the ankles and the legs. And also for this sign, we have Saturn in the 8th house, so it's a major reformation of life pattern over the next few months. Rahu's in the 9th house. That particular combination is good for international fame. Mars is in the 10th, so good for career growth. Jupiter's in the 11th, so good for financial gain, but again, too many expenses. For Leo, Leo has Sun in the 11th house, good for financial gain. Jupiter's in the 10th, good for career growth. Mars is in the 9th, a lot of individual effort is indicated. K2 is in the 2nd, a lot of misinterpretations of what the sign is saying. Moon is in the 5th house, and I think since this is Donald Trump's sign, The debate, I think, will go actually fairly well for him, although in immediate terms, it will strengthen his enemies because Saturn's over here aspecting the first house. But in the long run, it will work better for him. For Joe Biden, short Joe will seem much more mature and more in control than he normally seems to be. But there will still be doubts about him. He'll be more competitive. He'll be more feisty than we're used to seeing him be. So that Mars in the sixth house will increase his skills in the debate. But I think that Saturn aspecting Trump's rising sign and Jupiter aspecting Biden's rising sign favors Biden in the debate. For the moon sign over here, for this moon over here, luck will actually be on Trump's side, though. And like I said, it's funny, this paradoxically, this debate may not go well. And this is the same is true of any Leo sun rising sign. And there'll be a certain amount of frustration, but it will lead to gains for Leo this month and also luck. So that actually looks fairly good for most Leos. K2 is in the first house for Virgo. Intuition for Virgo will be strong. Dissatisfaction with a relationship partner will be strong. Moon will be well placed. It's a full moon right now, and moon will be well placed. Is well placed in the chart. Saturn is in the sixth house, so that can give some health issues, especially with the legs. And Mars is over here in the eighth house. I think for this sign, it'll be very good at communication, but we'll have to watch out for health. For Libra has Mars in the seventh house, aspected by Saturn, so its gains will be limited until Mars moves into Taurus. And so that will be within about a month. For this sign, there'll be change of orientation, new interest in learning, hard work. Rahu's in the sixth, some frustration with mechanical issues and appliances. But career-wise, it'll actually do fairly well. This sign will actually do fairly well. It just won't see the economic benefits right away. For for Scorpio has Mars in the sixth house, so it'll be very competitive. Moon is in the second house. It'll also be besieged by enemies, so I'm not expecting speech to be really clear for Biden, to be honest. But Moon is in the second house, and that's favorable for this particular rising sign. But the speech will be a little bit disconnected for this sign this month and this week. Saturn's in the fourth house, not a good position for maintaining status. Rahu's in the fifth house, a lot of lies. If this sign's been engaged in any lies, they'll come out. And Sun, Mercury, Venus will rest in the eighth house. So this is not the best combination for maintaining control. K2, friends will attack. For Sag, Moon is in the first house, and it's the eighth house, Lord is in the first house. So there will be secrets told about this sign, or what we call a gang of attacks on this sign. Saturn is in the third house, a lot of bravery for the sign. Children will be a little bit problematic. Rahu is in the fourth house, some danger to reputation or status. The first Lord is in the sixth house, so it'll be a year of struggle for this sign overall until probably next June. Venus is in the seventh house, so you'll attract a lot of good potential relationship partners. K2 is in the 10th. Work will be prominent, but not recognized. For Capricorn, Saturn's in the second house, a lot of focus on money, a lot of ambition. a lot of potential for increased growth for this sign. So as always, Capricorns will tend to look pretty good this month. The only drawback is you have a bunch of planets in the sixth house, which are good planets for the sign. Sun's the only one that's not a good planet for the sign, so that indicates overcoming enemies. But Venus and Mercury are good planets for the sign, and Venus in particular will be compromised for about a month until it hits the seventh house. Then you'll see financial improvement. K2 in the ninth house, a variable luck. Moon is in the 12th house, a lot of spending. For Aquarius, a lot of dynamic growth for this sign, a lot of activity, a lot of pressure put on the sign, a lot of dissatisfaction with money, spending more often than they get it in. Mars is in the third house, a lot of perfectionism connected with the sign. Jupiter's in the fourth house, so some gain of status. Mercury's in the fifth, along with Sun, and that's not a bad combination. So that's actually good for love affairs or romantic involvements. But just be careful about them. This year overall is still not a good year for romantic involvements, to be honest with you. K2 is in, and a lot of Aquarians and Leos will feel like they need to get out of a relationship partner because they're just either bored or feel restricted, and that's not really a good reason to get out of a relationship. K2's in the eighth house. That's not a bad placement. It makes the sign much more exploratory, more investigative. Moon's in the 11th, some potential for increased financial growth. Finally, and last but not least, Pisces has Rahu in it. Mars in the second house, so it'll make the sign a little bit aggressive. Jupiter's in the third house, ambitious. Sun, Mercury, Venus in the fourth house, a lot of concentration on home and career, and again, heavy expenditure pattern. I know I'm running over time. Please forgive me. Astro mapping relocate. Let's go to this sign. And please, while you're at it, please subscribe, share, and like. We're up to 800 subscribers, not a massive amount of subscribers, but we're within striking distance of the thousand subscribers necessary to monetize the channel. That's not, but it needs other things like likes and comments and things like that in order to really make it. So let's go over here. This is Sun, Venus, Mercury, all influencing. So heavy government control and some financial limitations in Hawaii right now. There's some panic in Alaska. I'm not sure what that's connected to. And also in northwestern Canada. So we have Rahu, there is some frustration. We have a Mars line running up to Baja, California, and also through Arizona and Nevada and Wyoming and up into central Canada. So this is interesting. So this should be kind of an aggressive period for this particular part of the country. There's a Jupiter line intersecting a Saturn line in Washington, D.C., right over, pretty close to Washington, D.C. So this part of the country will have either some kind of economic restrictions or some kind of political restrictions. This will go all the way down to Central America, Nicaragua, and also most of the East Coast. This is kind of a critical part in terms of the economy of the United States. So I'm not sure whether or not we're going to see an economic shutdown or something like, or maybe even some power outages in the East Coast. Cuba is also experiencing this. And as we go down into South America, we see this Saturn line going through over Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. And so we know these countries are going through some hard times right now. And they'll be in the news a lot more, especially Bolivia, Colombia, Brazil. And there's a Rahu line, so there could be even some panic in Brazil or Paraguay or Argentina. There's a moon line running right through these lines close to Greenland and Iceland, but that's really not a significant line as far as I can tell. Most of these lines are converging in Norway, which actually, according to different records, is becoming a very rich country, but Sweden is getting hit hard with large immigration patterns. And we have UK has, I need to get clear this way to see what kind of a line that is. Hold on a second. That's a Jupiter line running through the UK. So it looks like the elections are not far off in the UK. Spain, Jupiter line running through Spain, Morocco, and down close to Gabon, in Africa, and also through Libya, and I'm sorry, also through Libya, and that's buffered by a Saturn line hitting most of Eastern Europe and touching on Italy and all the way down into Central Africa, close to Central Africa. So we should expect to see some hard economic times in this belt of countries. And there's also a sun line running through Greece, close to Egypt, and there's a lot of activity over Turkey. So Sun, Venus, Mercury, a lot of what I would call governmental investigations in Turkey, and all the way down to Egypt and the Sudan, down into South Africa, all the way down the coast through Zimbabwe and Mozambique. So those parts of the world should have some trials. They'll be in the news a lot. This is close to Ukraine. Some Moon-Mars conjunction right over here. And that should put that in the public eye a lot. And also Iran is gearing up for something militarily. And Kuwait and United Arab, I'm sorry, not Kuwait, and United Arab Emirates is also being hit by some things. There's a Jupiter line running through India. That's a protected line, so that's good. But there are some political issues coming up in India right now, and there's an increased, not conservatism, an increased desire for liberalism in India, or more, maybe for more labor reform, less privatization, less economic expansion. And finally, we get over here to China, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. All those countries are showing sort of the overwhelming attribute of Saturn. So this actually sort of shows economy slipping a little bit. If we go down here to the Philippines, increased governmental control. Borneo increased governmental control. Even Australia increased governmental control. And if we just go to zoom out a little bit on this. And that's even true of New Zealand. So a lot of countries around the world are showing increased governmental control or increased desire to control the populations. Now, I'm not seeing that in a negative way. I understand where that's coming from. I understand there's increased desire for predictability, for security, those kinds of things. But I wouldn't be surprised, horribly surprised, if we didn't see some cyber attacks in July to August. And some might be accidental, some might be pranks, some might be hostile. So prepare yourself for those. So again, every planetary combination offers an opportunity for growth, for adaptability, for doing what you want to do with your life, or maybe figuring out a way to adapt so you can do what you want to do with your life, for learning new things. So this isn't a pessimistic broadcast. It may sound it, but it really isn't. It's just sort of like a weather forecast. So, so if you get a bad weather forecast, to wear your raincoat, right? Or to bring an umbrella. And to quote Zappa, anyway, an umbrella doesn't, like a mind, doesn't work unless it's open. So keep an open mind about these things. Keep an open mind about what you see on television, hear from the media, hear from any sources you hear. Keep your skeptic's hat on, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. I love you all. Thanks so much for watching, and I really appreciate your support. We're growing slowly but steadily, and actually that appeals to me more because it indicates that I have an audience that isn't, that may want more quick bites, but are willing to settle for this guy who kind of rambles on about what he thinks about what the planets means. So I appreciate that, and I hope I'm keeping you informed. And God bless you all. Bye, everybody.